What is going on, everybody? The Original Mako back, and as promised, we have the updated weapon tier list here for Vampire Survivors. I was looking, there's actually been a lot added since the last time I did one, so should be fun, should be exciting. But before we get into it, be sure to check the links down below as always if you want to see me play this game and a bunch of other really cool and exciting games live. Check out the Twitch channel. I'd really appreciate it. We have a ton of fun over there. There's a bunch of really cool people in the community, and we're always doing some crazy challenges, so come check that out. I'd really appreciate it. Also, be sure you hit the subscribe button down below. Like I said, all these different games, all these challenges, there's a ton of content, and you're not going to want to miss it. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you know when the videos go live. Now, that's enough for the intro. This is going to be a long video. I'm going to try to keep it relatively concise because there are so many weapons, but let's just go ahead and get into business here, shall we? So I'm going to be going over each weapon, saying what it does, and ranking it on the tier list. You guys know what a tier list is. We've been here before. The axe is our first one. I believe this is in alphabetical order. So, although alphabetical order based on how I titled the pictures, either way, doesn't matter. So the axe, pretty simple, high damage, high area scaling. Stats that it ignores is duration. So duration increases do not affect the axe whatsoever. I'm going to plop this bad boy right in B. I think it's a great weapon. It pierces through enemies. Its coverage, once again, like it says, it scales well with area. So the bigger AoE you have, the better off you're going to be. It's a little slow to get it rolling a little bit. Not super slow, not one of the slowest, but a little on the slower side. So I think it's just right smack, like right in the middle here, off the rip. It's a good weapon. And once again, I'm going to rank each weapon on its own. So I can't say, oh, the axe turns into the scythes, so that makes it better. I'm just ranking purely the axe, and I think the axe is a solid choice. Not the best, not the worst, but it is a good thing to have in your weapon slots. So axe gets a B tier from me. Next up, we have the Bible, it's a Bible that orbits around the character. It scales very well with projectile speed, duration, and area. Area can be kind of iffy though if you get too much area, but projectile speed and duration, absolutely. This one is gonna go above the axe. I don't think I can quite put it into A tier based on some of the other weapons, but I think it is better than the axe. The little circle you make around yourself, this little protective area, is super nice and helps keep enemies off you. It does a really decent amount of damage, considering I'd almost consider it more of a defensive tool for keeping enemies back, but it does a good amount of damage. Like it says, if you scale it with some projectile speed and duration, I mean, you're going to have an amount as well. You're going to have 4, 5, 6 Bibles spinning at a rapid speed around you. Very few things are going to get through and be able to touch you. So not only is it good defensively, it's a great offensive tool as well. So I think that makes it just a better choice than the only other item on the list. And like, this is probably going to end up being a high B tier weapon, but I can't quite push it into A tier. Next up, we have the bird and the other bird. Both birds I'm going to put into D tier. I'm debating adding an F tier to this list. Should I add an F tier? Yes, I'm going to do it real quick. Hold on. Give me just a second. Add a row below. This is going to be F tier, and it can be light blue. Sure. I'm going to put the birds into F tier. Listen, it's not that they're that, well, maybe I actually should just put them into D tier. Now that I'm thinking about it, let me look at the other weapons and make a decision here. I really got to think through this. Although I don't know if it matters because I'm going to get shit on in the comments no matter what. So, why is this song so much louder than the last one? Also, this is supposed to be fucking lo-fi. Hold on. I gotta fast forward a bit. Better. I really had to think about this. Listen, I am going to put these into F tier. Here's why. The birds are so slow to get going. I know I was going to talk about evolutions, but in order for the birds to have any value, you need both of them, and having 2 of them taking up 2 weapon slots is a lot. They're super slow. They are require a lot. You know, scales really well with cooldown and duration, but then again, everything scales well with cooldown, so that's not saying much. They're not great. They're not great weapons, and they're a hindrance to have until they're evolved, but since I'm just focused on these weapons, they're not great. They're not great to have whatsoever. So, F tier for the birds. Next up, we have the bone. Throws, it's a bouncing projectile. Scales extremely well with duration and speed, as do all bouncing projectiles, and amount as well. This is a great weapon. Does a ton of damage. Can I put it into A tier? I think I can. I think the bone's good enough to be an A tier. Previously, I believe on my last weapon tier list, I put it lower because this may be totally wrong, but if I'm thinking how I'm thinking now, it's a very rare weapon to find. So I would have probably put it a little lower because of how rare it is. However, with the new shopkeeper, you can just buy it for 1,000 beans and you're on your way. So you can get this in every single run on every single map if you want. So that's not really a downside for it anymore. It scales super well with a lot of things. It bounces all over the place, hits a ton of enemies, does a lot of damage, and I think is a great weapon choice for a lot of different characters. So the bone is going to be A tier. Next up, we have the cat. The cat I'm going to put into D tier. The biggest reason... Oh, let me see the description and see if it says anything fun or exciting. Summons capricious projectiles, might interact with pickups. It's best with luck and floor chicken. So if you don't know, the cats... I have a whole video explaining how the cats work, but they can pick up drops, especially floor chicken. When they pick up a floor chicken on the ground, they buff themselves. And luck increases their chance to fight each other when they run into each other. So in order for this weapon to be good, you have to have a lot of them and moving pretty quickly to give you a better chance of them running into each other, starting a fight, and creating a big AoE attack. The reason this is so low is because it takes a long time to get going. Once you have it going, once you have this at level 7, level 8, you have some other things to go with it, it's great. It can do a lot of damage. But until you get it going, it is a slow waste of space. That's all it is. It's annoying. Sometimes you might need the floor chicken and the cat's like, yoink, not today. It's just super frustrating sometimes. But once you get it going, it will do a lot of damage. So your output's going to be great. So D tier for the cat here. Next up, we have the cherry bomb. Throws a bouncing projectile. It occasionally explodes. Cherry bomb's going to go C tier. I really like the bouncing projectile weapons that all the characters that have increased projectiles start with. This one's my least favorite. It seems to always have the least DPS between them. The explosions are cool. I like the AoE, but it's a very small AoE, even if you get a bunch of increased AoE or area. And like I said, the damage output's just not great, and it's not as exciting as literally every single other projectile weapon, like the bone, Rune Tracer, Celestial Dusting, the new egg, all of it. It's just not nearly as fun. So C tier for ya boy cherry bomb. Next up, we have Celestial Dusting, which is the one the dog starts with, another one of the projectile weapons. Throws a bouncing projectile. Cooldown reduces when moving. So obviously scales with move speed. The faster you're moving, the more projectiles you're spitting out. Also, once you get this thing to level 8, it heals you. A lot, actually. So this one is going to be high B tier. I still don't think it doesn't have quite the range or usually the damage output as something like the bone. So I'm not going to put it into A tier, but the fact that it's scales with move speed, which is really nice. Like I said, cooldown's like the best thing in the game. So if you have multiple ways to increase cooldown, that's pretty good. As well as having that level 8 ability of being able to heal you can be super useful in a lot of different situations. So What the hell? So that's why I'm going to put it at the top of B tier for right now. Next up, we have the Clock Lancet. Has a chance to freeze enemies. This is going to be really interesting. So we're not talking about upgrades here, and we're not bringing Arcanas into the situation. We're just talking about this weapon. Not talking about how it scales with Arcanas, not talking about how it scales with its upgrade, just this weapon. So this one, if you're thinking about how can I make the Clock Lancet better, power, speed, amount, and area have no effect on this weapon whatsoever. So those are not going to be the ways to do it. It's super slow to get going. And even once you get it going, like once you get it to like level 8, it's not the best thing in the world. So I'm going to put it in D tier. The only reason I put it above the cats, because the cats do get going once they're up there, is because once you have this at max level, assuming you have some other things to go with it, even if you don't, honestly, you can kind of cheese your way into a win, because the freeze happens in it's not a random pattern, it's a predictable pattern. It goes in a clock formation, clockwise around a circle. So you always know where your next beam is going to be, and you can kind of just keep running through the enemies that get frozen in order to avoid taking any damage. It's pretty good. So that's the only reason I'm putting it above the cat in this scenario. But still very slow to get going and whatnot. Next up, we have the Cross, which aims at the nearest enemy, and it has a boomerang effect. So it aims at the nearest enemy and comes all the way back across the screen. Duration does not affect it. Everything else does, however. Also, sorry, watching my parents' dog for the week, and he's looking out the blinds right now, messing up the shot, messing up the lighting. I was just kidding. You can keep looking out. Oh, he wanted to play with his toy. So this is one of the best early game weapons. Early game weapons in the game. Super good at killing enemies. Has a good amount of area because of that boomerang effect. And frankly, this is one of the best weapons, like, that has an upgrade that you don't really need to get it, because the damage output isn't that much different. It does a lot of damage, and I think it's an A tier weapon. I think it is above the bone. I think it's just a really good weapon. There are very few weapons where you're like, yeah, I don't even need this upgrade because this weapon is just so good, and I think the Cross is one where you can get away with it. So definitely A tier for me. And like I said, it's not a slow weapon at all. It is effective immediately. Next up, we have the Kinder Egg. Technically, it's called La Roba. Generates bouncing projectiles. It scales with duration and speed, just like most of the other projectile weapons do. However, this one is just much more fun than all the rest. I don't think it's... maybe it is better than the Cross. No, I'm going to keep it behind the Cross. I think if we compare both weapons at level 8, La Roba might be better. I think it has higher damage output potential, but it definitely takes longer to get going. But not only the fact that it is very useful, but it's just fun to use. You throw giant pianos all across the screen. How is that not fun? That's fun. It's exciting. It's intuitive. You throw a bunch of stuff across the screen, and it's just a fun weapon to use, and it's good. So fun and good equals good. Pog. Fun plus good equals Pog. That's can actually be mathematically proven, and I think they should teach that in schools more often. I think I'm going to save all weapon evolutions to the end, so we're going to skip this one. Go to the Fire Wand. Fires at a random enemy, and it deals heavy damage. It ignores duration. So duration means nothing, but everything else will help scale this weapon. This one's going to go into... is it going to go... It's going to go low B. I was thinking high C, maybe. High C. God, that sounds good. But I think it's better in low B. The reason I was going to put it in C tier is because of how slow it is at the beginning. It's not nearly as slow as like the birds or the cat, but it is very slow. However, once you get it to the end, the damage output is unreal, and it's just a very, very good choice to have, and it'll do a ton of damage regardless. I think it's a great weapon. It's a good weapon for helping take down bosses in the early game. Once again, it fires at a random enemy, so you don't really know where it's going to go, unlike, you know, the cross fires at a certain enemy, the clock goes in a circle, everything else kind of just bounces around the screen, but it's still really, really good for taking out some of the heftier enemies in the early to mid game. So I'm going to give it B tier, low B, could maybe be in the high C because of how long it takes, but still, definitely B tier. Next up, we have the double guns here. These ones are super interesting where I want to put this. Oh, boy. I got to think. So let's see. I don't think they say too much. Fires quickly in 4 fixed directions. Yes, they don't scale with duration, just like most of the other projectile-based weapons. Okay, I'm gonna put these above the cross. They're so good. I mean, they're a little slower than the cross. I think they're not as effective as the cross is right away, but it doesn't take long to get them going. And once they're going, it's nuts. And even without the, like, even if you just do one individually, it's still going to shred through enemies. And I think it's just overall a really, really solid weapon to get. Both of them or each one individually, they're both great options. So, like I said, I think maybe take just a little longer to get going than the cross, but not crazy enough to make it worse than the cross, in my opinion. Next up, we have the garlic. This one's really interesting for me, but I'm going to put it bottom of D tier. This is where I'm glad I made an F tier, because I don't think garlic goes into the F, but it does go into D tier. Let me tell you why. You know, as I was saying, I'm still going to keep it in D tier, but I'm going to move it up. Look, it's good early game, and by early game, I mean the first 4 minutes. It's good, okay? Maybe a little bit longer. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating. The first maybe 10 minutes. It'll cleave through some enemies, give you some defense, but it scales so horribly into late game that I have to put it down here because of how bad it is late game. Most of these other weapons, in fact, every other weapon we've talked about so far, at least scales okay late game, if not scales really well. This one's the exact opposite. It scales super well early, but it is so bad late that it is a waste of a slot. Just a complete waste of a slot. So it's going to go D tier. The only reason it's the top of D tier is because of how good it is at clearing out those small enemies early. But yeah, it's a noob trap. I made a whole video about why garlic is a noob trap. You should check it out. It'd be pretty cool. But anyways, D tier for the garlic. Next up, we have the knives. We have our next C tier weapon. I think I'm going to put them in top of C tier. I think they're better than the cherry bomb. So obviously the big downside with knives, let's see if it says anything here. Fires quickly in the face direction, ignores duration. So the big thing about the knives is you can only fire them in one direction. And this is a huge turnoff for most people. However, I think it's very useful. It can help you, like if you need to escape through a group of enemies, you just follow your knife. Well, the knives kind of have to go the way you're going, but just keep running through them with your knives. And same thing for like taking out bosses. You have extremely consistent damage on a boss as long as you're facing it. So you get a little bit of, you run away a little bit, make sure you can see it, let your knives just go to town on the boss, move away, repeat the process until the boss is dead. It'll help you kill bosses a lot quicker and can get you out of sticky situations. It scales pretty well. It's not like the damage output's very super low or anything. Another weapon that, you need a couple upgrades to really start feeling the effects of it, but I think it's decent. It's average to above average. That's why it's in the C tier. So knives, top of the C tier. Next up, we have the Laurel, a non-offensive weapon. When it's active, it shields you from damage. it's probably gonna end up right at the bottom of C because it could also be at the top of D. Once you get this to its level 7, level 8, it does help out a lot. It does shield you a good chunk from a lot of different damages, or a lot of different, you know, hits, and it cools down relatively quickly. It takes a while to get there, and once again, you have to remember this is taking up an entire weapon slot, so you don't have, you don't have another weapon that could be doing damage. You have this instead. So you got to think about that, but it is good, and like I said, I think it's okay. It can be a good option if you're trying to win your first run. It's not something that's gonna like hard carry you, but it is decent. And if you're maybe going, you know, if you're thinking about Arcanas and other things, maybe going for like a full defensive or healing build, then this is a pretty prime component of that. So that's why Laurel is in the C tier. Next up, just looking outside again, we have the Lightning Ring. Lightning Ring strikes random enemies on the screen. Projectile speed and duration do not matter, but it scales super well with cooldown and area of effect. Lightning Ring, I take a look at some of these other weapons here. It could really go, it could go here, it could go here, and it could go here, I think. I'm going to put it here. If I'm thinking about which I'd rather have between the Bone and Lightning Ring, I take Lightning Ring more often than not. Lightning Ring is definitely a bit slower than the Bone to get going, but it scales much better, I think. You know, once again, you're able to hit enemies on the edges of the screen, off screen even, like slightly off screen. I think it's a really, really good weapon for damage output and helping you just clear out enemies, has high damage. The Lightning Ring is just a great overall weapon, and I think it deserves to be in the A tier slot, so that's where we're going to put it, in the A tier slot. Next up, we have the Pentagram. Let's see what it says. So it erases everything in sight. Cooldown and luck are the only things that really affect it. Luck affecting how often you erase everything on the screen, as opposed to not erasing everything on the screen. Hey. No. We're about to chew our Ethernet cord. And then cooldown, obviously, to make it proc more often. So this one is going to go to the bottom of C. No, I'll put it a little above that. The reason being, once you get it to its top, like level 8, then it's great. Chances are you're not going to be erasing things on the screen very often, if at all, and it just wipes out enemies every so often, which is really good for trying to win runs. Sometimes it can get a little annoying, you know, while you're trying to get it to level 8, and you're like, oh, cool, this is going to kill this boss for me. Kills the boss, it wipes out the chest, you lose the chest, you lose XP. It can be a little bit frustrating, but in terms of trying to win runs, this usually has a net positive for you as opposed to a too big of a downside. At least that's what I found while using it. So Pentagram gets the C tier. Not at the bottom, not at the top, but it's just there. Next up, we have the Shadow Pinion. Generates damaging zones when moving, and it strikes when stopping. So while you're moving, it'll summon these things on the ground. If enemies walk over them, they take damage. And then once you stop, they fire in the direction you're facing. Originally, and I don't think this weapon was in my last tier list video, but I hated this weapon at first. This would have been an F tier weapon, probably would have been below the birds. However, I've had a change of heart. I still don't think it's the best thing ever, but I definitely think it's better than the 9. I don't think I can put it on the tier with these, but I can put it on the C tier confidently and put it near the top because it pierces through a ton of enemies. It scales well with a lot of different things. Move speed is another thing that scales this weapon because it kind of like Celestial Dusting, where it basically scales your cooldown a little bit. And overall, just this weapon can go to work. I think I mentioned this in my character tier list video, but the this and the upgraded version of this weapon was the first weapon that I beat the entire game on with only one weapon. In the new update, you can minimize or limit the amount of weapons you take in. And I limited it to one, played with the character Concetta that starts with this, and went to town. And it carried long enough until we get to the upgrade. And then it just started to put in work. Once again, the only reason it's not higher is because you have to get the full use out of it, you have to stop moving. Even if it's just half a second, it can still get kind of annoying and frustrating to have to constantly stop and make sure you're facing the right way. But it is very good. So C tier, top of C tier, not quite on that level, but we'll get to its upgrade eventually. Next up, we have the Rune Tracer. Rune Tracer's going top of A right now. It pierces through everything. It bounces. It has just as much impact right away as the cross, if not more. It scales just as well as these guns, if not better. It's just a great weapon. There's nothing else to say about it. It's just like the cross, where it has an upgrade. You absolutely do not need the upgrade. This will do a lot of damage with or without it. Bounces all around the screen, does a ton of damage. It's just a great weapon. There's no other way to really describe it. Next up, we have the Song of Mana. Song of Mana is going to go to the top of B tier. This weapon would be in different tiers depending on the map. Let's say Gallo Tower, for example. This thing's probably S tier. The only reason it's not in A is because it's only has vertical. Like, you can only go up and down, so you can't really attack to the left and right very well. So on something like the Library, Song of Mana kind of just is there. It doesn't really do much for you, but on Gallo Tower, it does a ton for you. So it kind of depends. So I'm going to put it in B tier. Even on the maps that it's good, it's really, really good. And even when it's not good, it still does a ton of damage, cleaves through enemies, and scales pretty well into the late game. So Song of Mana is going to go to the B tier for me. Next up, holy cow. Wait, is that it? Oh, no. Almost, though. Next up, we have the Wand. We only have a few more unupgraded weapons. Next up, we have the Wand. Another C tier, I think. I don't like it quite as much as the Shadow Pinion, I don't think. So the Wand fires at the nearest enemy, which is kind of good. Weapons that auto-target the nearest enemy, I like. But it doesn't pierce. It doesn't do a ton of damage. It doesn't scale super well. It's okay, but it's not. And now that I'm talking about it, I'm going to move it below those two. It's okay. It does not deserve to be in D tier, but it doesn't deserve to be any higher than this, that's for sure. So I like that spot for it. There's not too much more to say about it. It's just very average. So below, even a little bit below. Hey, no, don't chew on that. A little below average. Next up, we are up to... Oh, wait, that's the upgraded wand, isn't it? Hold on. Excuse me. Just don't mind me. I know what weapons look like. Next up, we have Carello is the official name for it. The giant shopping carts that you can yeet at people. Let me make sure that's the right... Yeah, Carello. Throws a bouncing projectile. The number of bounces is affected by the amount you have. Unfortunately, this is by far and away the worst projectile weapon. I'm going to put it at the top of D tier. It's worse than Cherry Bomb by a mile. Way worse than the Bone, Celestial Dusting, and Rune Tracer. All the other like bouncing projectile type weapons. So Carello only goes side to side. It doesn't last very long. And it doesn't do very much damage at all. I don't know what else you want me to say about it. It can scale well if you get a decent amount of AoE and might. But in general, it's not very good. It's not super exciting. You're not throwing giant grand pianos. You're throwing shopping carts from a Target parking lot at enemies and tickling them to death. So it's going to get D tier. Last... Oh, no, we have Santa Water. Whoops, I kind of skipped it. Next, we have Santa Water. Santa Water is a real interesting one. I'm going to put it at the bottom of B. I don't use it a lot in my runs, but I think it is very good. It scales pretty well. It scales really well late game. Excuse me. It does scale really well. very slow. It's not quite as slow as the Fire Wand, but I also don't think it's quite as... Nah, that's a lie. I think it's better late game than the Fire Wand is, just because you're going to kind of make a circle of water around yourself, and it's going to be very hard for enemies to get through it. It does constant damage over time. And yeah, now that I'm going to move it up a little bit. I don't think it's better than the Bible. I still think the Bible's better on its own, but I think this Santa Water is a really good option. And once again, if you're just trying to win a run, Santa Water is a great one to take and understand how to use pretty easily. So B tier for the Santa Water. Next up, last, not quite least, but not very high up there, is the Whip. I'm going to put it D tier. This has a similar issue to Song of Mana, where it can only go horizontally, just like the cart as well. However, unlike Song of Mana, it doesn't do that much damage, and it's just not very... It does okay damage, but it doesn't have as big of an area, and it just doesn't seem to do as nearly as well, even on the good maps for it, like the Library, for example. This is a weapon that if I'm not playing on Antonio, the character who starts with it, I will very, 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 very rarely take it. And in honesty, the only reason I would take it is for the new upgrade. So, yeah, that's all we've got for that. I believe that is every single unevolved weapon. So now we can get to the evolutions. And speak of the devil, the one we were just talking about is Fuala Fualu. Fuala Fualu is the name of this one. So this is the combination of the... Oh, wait a minute. Oh, no, this is an unevolved weapon. Sorry. Thank you. The good thing this was first, I wouldn't have recognized it. So this is a very new weapon. It's a different version of the whip called the Vento Sacro. And it's like the whip, just worse, in my opinion, because it only goes in one direction, like not even both sides horizontally, only the way you're facing, doesn't have a huge range. It does fire off a decent bit. It's kind of like a machine gun version of the whip. Like, it can get firing really fast, but it takes a while to get there, and once you're there, it does not do much damage. The whip at least one-shots enemies at the beginning. This weapon, not so much. So it's much less exciting. It's just not good. Still better than the cart, but just still not great. So now we get to Fualu Fuala, which is the combination of this whip and this whip. Once they hit level 8, they evolve into your boy Fuala Fuala. So it takes the properties of both. So it only fires in one direction, but it has a chance to crit. Oh, wait. It's the combination of the Vento Sacro and the Bloody Tear, which is the upgraded whip. So it takes combination from those two. It takes the attack pattern from the Vento Sacro, where it's only one direction and fires very quickly, but it also has a chance to crit, and when there's a crit, it can explode. So it's pretty good. It's not bad, but it's not overly impressive by any means. It's fun to mess around with a couple times, but it's not like, oh, this is the best thing I've ever seen. This is the coolest upgraded weapon of all time. I am going to put it at the top of C tier because I do think it is very useful. But once again, just not one of the most useful or exciting. Hey. No. Not one of the most useful or exciting things out of all of our different weapons here. Next up, we have Labora. And I think this is going to be our first S tier weapon. Now, it's probably going to sit at the bottom of S tier, if I had to guess. But it is definitely S tier. There's not much to say about it. It's Santa Water, but infinitely better. The area gets bigger as it's sitting on the ground, so the longer duration, the bigger it gets. It follows you, so it kind of like goes in on you to make a defensive circle. The damage over time is incredible. The damage output you will get from this weapon is ridiculous, and Labora is absolutely an S tier weapon. Next up, we have the Song of Mana upgrade, which is the Menage. It might slow enemies down, and it turns it from just a vertical weapon into a big circle. It's going to go just above it. I don't think this is one of the better weapon evolutions. It's okay. but it's not like it's that much better than the Song of Mana. The biggest thing is turning it into a circle instead of just the vertical, but it's not a super exciting weapon evolution by any means. So that's why I'm putting it just barely above its predecessor. Next up, we have the axes, the death scythes here. Death scythes are going to be... I'm not talking about these with Arcanas, so I think I'm going to go top of A instead of putting it into S. I think on its own, it's not quite as good as Labora, but it's still going to put out a ton of damage. You're going to be hitting enemies all across the screen. It pierces, and it's just going to hit like a bus. Scales well with just about everything. If Arcanas were in the mix, I'd move this into S tier, but I said I was going to leave Arcanas out of it, and it's too late to turn back now, so... that's where we're going to put the Death Scythes, at the very top of a tier. Next up, we have Unholy Vespers, which is the upgraded version of the Bible. I believe the upgraded version, essentially, the only change is that it never ends. So, it'll constantly be circling around you, and you'll never stop. This one is going to be a very similar case to the Song of Mana. I'm putting it just ahead of the Bible, and here's why. Here's why. Listen to me. Hear me out. This one's probably going to get me shit. I don't think it's that much better than just the regular Bible. If you're taking the Bible, you're probably scaling with duration. In fact, in order to get the Unholy Vespers, you have to have duration scaling. So, and if you have a cooldown reduction and duration scaling, the regular Bible's already almost never ending. So it's not that much better than the original one. So I am not going to put it that much higher. Obviously, Unholy Vespers doesn't take a little bit to get going. Like the Bible takes a little bit, a couple of upgrades, but it's not that much better. I think I'll put it above Celestial Dusting, and maybe well, actually, I'll just put it at the top of B tier because it is better than the Song of Mana upgrade. But I guess I was just doing that to try to make my point that it's not that much better than the original, the classic version of the Bible. It doesn't, like the axe to Death Scythes is a big change, whereas Bible to Unholy Vespers isn't that big of a change. Next up, we have Vandalier, maybe the biggest disparity between a unupgraded and upgraded version. Vandalier is A tier. For upgraded weapons, I feel like I do have to take into account how difficult it is. No. I'm just going to look at the weapon in a vacuum. The weapon in a vacuum is S tier. The weapon in a vacuum is better than Labora. The damage output is ridiculous. It's non-stop, constantly firing, and just hitting like an absolute bus. So, it's in a vacuum. If we don't think about how hard it is to obtain, I think it's just, out of everything on the list right now, it's the best weapon. So that's how we're going to do this. Next up, we have, I forget what the actual name is, Vicious Hunger. So this is the evolved cat, and it's the same weapon, essentially, although every single thing that gets hit might turn into gold. So the cat takes a while to get going. Once you get it going, though, it's really good, and by the time you have the evolved one, you obviously have gotten it going, and then you can just get a bunch of free gold out of it. So this is a solid weapon. I don't think it's super crazy. I'm gonna put it right here. I think it's better than these two, but I think it probably doesn't hit as hard as these. If you're going for gold, like if you're doing a run just trying to get money, then this is S tier. But if you're just trying to win runs, I mean, it does good damage still, and you're just going to get some extra gold out of it. But once again, it's not that big of a difference from the normal version of the weapon. Not a huge difference. But the ginormous amounts of gold that it can get you is worth bringing it up to B tier. Next up, we have Heaven's Sword, which I kind of talked about earlier, where I said the cross will do almost as much damage as this does regardless, but this does still need to be up in A tier ahead of the cross. The upgraded version has a chance to crit. Crit damage is fantastic. It can hit a little bit harder, has just about the same AoE as the normal cross. And like I said, the only real damage difference is from those crits. So it kind of depends on the situation, but it is a little bit better and does definitely deserve to be in A tier. So that's where it's going to go. Next, we have the Fire Wand upgrade. Big Bad Fire Wand. Fire Wand's going to go S tier. I think the upgraded Fire Wand is absolutely better than the Scythes. It hits like a truck, pierces through enemies. I mean, when you watch the Fire Wand, the evolved version, go off, whatever direction those giant meteors go, it just wipes that area of the screen. It just wipes them clean. Super good, super useful. And if there were Arcanas involved, this would probably be the top because of Heart of Fire, but they're not. So it's still a very, very good weapon, and I think deserves to be up in the S tier. Next up, we have the upgraded Garlic, which is called Soul Eater. So it basically has some lifesteal, but it's only when you kill an enemy. You're not going to be killing many enemies with it. So I'll put it above Garlic because it is technically better, but it's still not very good. When you recover health, it does increase damage output, but I would rather have the cart than be running an upgraded Garlic. So not a fan, not for me. Sue me if you want. If you're a big Garlic fan, I'm sorry. If you came from Asmon Gold, who's a big Garlic guy, that's great, and you have every right to be wrong. It's just not very good. Next up, we have the Bloody Tear, which is the evolved version of the Whip. This one is going to go up. How far up do I want it to go, though? It's not great. I am going to put it just below the Fuwala, though, because, look, it still has the same issue of being only going horizontally and not having a lot of AoE in that direction. But the lifesteal that you get, because you do get lifesteal from this weapon, and does it have an innate crit? I think it does. Yeah, it can deal crit and absorb HP. So the innate lifesteal is really nice. It can keep you alive in a lot of different situations. The crits are good as well. It doesn't scale nearly as well as almost every other weapon on this. Like, it just doesn't scale super well late game. The big enemies at the end are not going to be, they're not going to be taking your shit. The Bloody Tear is going to be like, you're basically shooting a feather duster at him, is how little damage it's going to be doing. So the lifesteal is really nice, but the damage output and area that you cover, not so nice. Next up, we have the Ferengis, which is the upgraded version of the guns. This is now the best weapon on this list. It's S tier, Omega S tier. It scales with revives. The more revives you have, the more beams you shoot. Even if you don't have a ton of beams, the beams hit like a truck, constantly rotating, constantly hitting enemies, constantly dealing a lot of damage. They are fantastic, beautiful weapons. Just you love to see it. Next up, we have the upgraded Rune Tracer, which is called No Future. It explodes when it bounces and when it hits something, I believe. So when it hits something, it explodes. It's in my opinion, honestly, sometimes worse than the original Rune Tracer. But I'm going to put it just above because I think in most cases it's a little bit better, but not at all by much. Not at all by much. The OG Rune Tracer for me just really gets the job done. You don't really need this. The slight bit of AoE you get from the explosions is great. Other than that, there's no real difference. So that's all I have to say about that. Upgraded knives. Upgraded knives are very pog. I'm going to put it just below the Unholy Vespers. I think it's just a bit worse, but it's essentially takes the knives and increases the fire rate like 10. What does it say? It fires with no delay, so there's no cooldown reduction. It's just going to be rapid firing knives in one direction. Super good for getting out. I said the Fire Wand, when you see it fire, it wipes out an area. The knives will wipe out whatever they're looking at. If you're facing a direction, every enemy coming from that direction is sauced. There's no chance that they have to get through. So knives are pretty good. I'm a big fan of the evolved knives. and I think they're very pog. Next up, we have the upgraded Lancet, Infinite Corridor. Excuse me. I'm just going to, real quick, no reason here, let's make it pink. I could add 2 or 3 more tiers, and then this weapon would go there. This is the best weapon in the game, bar none. This is going to be the best weapon in the game probably forever. If anything ever surpasses this weapon, we've reached Goku mode, Super Saiyan levels, because this weapon's ridiculous. Once again, it's the upgraded Lancet. Every couple of seconds, there's this little beam of light on the ground, like a big circle that spreads out. Every enemy within that circle gets their health cut in half immediately, and it stacks. So let's say you have death, for example. Every time you hit death with this, his health continues to half over and over and over. I mean, if you have a few other evolved weapons, you half everything's health once, they're one shot after that. This weapon's ridiculous. And it also takes into account, like, when it does half health to everything, it counts it as damage. So if you look at damage numbers when you use this, it's like doing 200 million damage per second. It's ridiculous. It's by far and away the best weapon in the game. If you get this, it's almost, depending on the other things you have, it is almost an automatic win. So that is why it is in S+ tier. Next up, we have the upgraded Laurel, which is the Crimson Shroud. It caps all incoming damage at 10 and retaliates when losing charges. So when you do get hit, you'll never take more than 10 damage, and when you get hit, you'll also retaliate with some damage to enemies. I'm going to put this... It definitely deserves to be A tier. You could probably make an argument that it's S. I'm just not as big of a fan of fully defensive builds. But in terms of defensive builds, it's insane. Capping damage at 10 is ridiculous, and doing damage back every time you get hit is fantastic. So it's a great weapon. For me personally, it doesn't get to S tier, but for a lot of people, it probably is an S tier. So I'm still going to stick it in A tier, though. It still deserves that. Next up, we have is it called Crescent Moon? Oh, Gorgeous Moon, the upgraded Pentagram. It generates extra XP gems when killing everything on the screen, and it gathers them all automatically. This really, really depends. For an average run, why is this like a beatbox? What the hell? For an average run, this is definitely an A tier. Probably the top of A tier, because once again, it's automatically generating more XP and automatically collecting XP for you. There are some scenarios where you don't want to collect XP and scale, so it's not good for that, obviously. If you're not going for cooldown, this isn't, obviously, once again, not great. However, overall, for your typical average run, Gorgeous Moon is a great addition to helping you just get to that 30-minute mark. So that's why it is going to go into A tier. Hey. That's the Ethernet cord. If we lose the Ethernet cord, we're out of business. So, no, don't chew on that. Next up, we have, what is this called? It is the Valkyrie Turner. It's the evolved Shadow Pinion. And the description is bigger, longer, faster, stronger. So, as Daft Punk once said, S tier. I'm going to put it just below the Vandal. Stop. Hey, leave it. No. You can't chew that. I'm going to put it just below the Vandalier because, like I said, this is the weapon that I won the game with, like only using one weapon. I had no other help, just this, and we won the run. 30 minutes. It does a ton of damage. If you know how to use it, you can get the most out of it. You can scale it super well. Obviously, it's better on some maps than others, but it is still overall a fantastic weapon regardless of the map you're on, and I think it's just great. I didn't like this weapon a lot at first. I have now learned. I have been, hopefully my sins have been forgiven, and this is now an S tier weapon in my eyes. It's amazing. Lightning Ring, Thunder Loop is the name of this one. S tier, bottom of S tier. It's not as good as the things above it, but it is better than the Gorgeous Moon. It's just, basically the lightning ring, but it's lightning strikes twice. It's insane. Damage output's ridiculous. Area coverage, ridiculous. The ability to hit enemies that are kind of off screen or just coming onto screen is amazing. It's super, super good and one of the better weapon upgrades for sure. Last, not least, but not great, is the wand. Upgraded wand is gonna go... once again, we're looking at the weapon. Hey! No. Upgraded wand is going to go, once again, if we're looking at it in a vacuum, right below the knives. It's just not as good as some of the other things on the list. It fires pretty fast, and it auto-targets the closest enemy, which is super nice. The damage output is just so low. And late game, from like 20 minutes to 30 minutes, it's pretty obsolete compared to a lot of the other weapons, in my opinion. So that's where it's going to go. Almost right in the middle of everything. But there it is. There is our tier list. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm trying to, man, I mean, I like it. I think it's a decent tier list here. I'm sure you guys are going to be pissed about some things, so let me know what your thoughts are down below. But I think the one that's probably the least arguable has to be the Clock Lancet upgrade. Everything else could definitely be argued based on people's opinions. So let me know your thoughts down below. But that's it for this tier list. We'll have an Arcana tier list coming soon, so be excited. Get ready for that. But thank you guys so much for the support as always. Be sure you check those links down below. Hopefully you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I love each and every one of your faces, and I will catch you all in the next video.